My name is Dr. Kristen Rodier. I am the coordinator for Philosophy 252. I am the co-author of Critical Thinking, Logic, and Argumentation and Introduction, co-authored with Eric Dayton. I have these maps at the beginning of each unit, except for the very last unit, where I sort of make connections between everything in the readings and what you're doing in the unit. Here, our introductory chapter or introductory unit really asks this big question of, am I a critical thinker? Which, of course, you are, but in asking that question, we have to look into what it means to be a critical thinker. And we have to ask ourselves, are we motivated to improve? What do we want to improve? And how can you use what's in this course to improve that? You're going to learn things, how to critically think about things in all of your classes, I hope. But this one in particular zeroes in on a certain set of tools. So one of the biggest tools that we get introduced to in this particular course is using arguments. And so really, what is an argument? I think about this a lot, but what an argument is we're telling an audience, we're making claims, but we're also saying that those claims are justified and here's why. So really what we're doing is we're trying to convince, and this is a tricky thing. We have to figure out what the statements are that we want to convince people of. We have to look at whether or not what we've provided as premises are necessary or just sufficient for the conclusion. So are they necessary in the sense that we can't do without them? Or are they just sufficient in terms of other pieces of information will also help? Identifying that premise-conclusion relationship is so important because that's the support relationship. Premise is, I think of premises as like legs of a table. They hold it up, right? They hold up the conclusion, and so there's that support between them. And one of the ways that we figured out how to support relationships is with these sort of enduring logical forms. So you'll find these different forms in the next unit. And also thinking about our relationships of those logical structures. So something might be able to fit into a form, but that doesn't mean that what we're talking about is true. And so that's kind of the difference between validity and soundness. The other thing that helps with critical thinking in terms of using arguments, making arguments, evaluating arguments, is avoiding fallacies, which is really what sort of the back half of the course is really about. And so arguments, getting familiar with them, making them, is a huge part of being a critical thinker. But of course, we have to develop those skills. You know, I was not always good at identifying premises from conclusions. I still struggle with them. It sort of really depends. Each passage is different in how it presents information. And so we develop skills, but we also have to be interested in developing those skills. You know, you can't sort of force someone to become a better critical thinker. You have to be interested in that. And part of that is being open to new information. You know, being curious. And you could imagine someone whose level of curiosity is lower. It's going to be more difficult for them to really dig in and figure out where are the premises, where are the conclusions. And so if you have some curiosity about new information, that will help you be a better critical thinker. The text also talks a lot about being skeptical, and being skeptical in a kind of principled way versus a just sort of doubting anything and everything, and kind of having a negative filter on all information. We should be skeptical of information in appropriate ways. And that's part of what we're going to learn in the course, is how to be appropriately skeptical. And in order to improve our skills as a critical thinker, we have to be motivated to improve. So, like I said again, this has to be a project that you're undertaking and that you're applying and thinking through how this is going to help you, and do you want to get better at thinking through things that are important in your profession, your career. A skill that comes up over and over again throughout the course is being able to ask good questions. So when we ask a question, what is that doing? We're trying to get information, but that information is also building on previous information. And so, we can ask a really big question like, what is truth, right? It's going to be really difficult for us to start building on something from that. But when we hear about a scientific claim and we say something like, well, what was the study population? And what were they doing? And what was the period of time? And we sort of start building on those kinds of questions. It helps us get at what is justifying a particular claim better. And we'll talk about, in the fallacies area, about a lot of different ways that asking questions can go wrong. Another thing that we're going to talk about a lot in this course is about language. So I think about language as this sort of web of interconnected meaning, but also it has these individual kind of bricks or units, which are words, and those words make themselves into sentences into premises, conclusions, arguments, and then you put a bunch of arguments together, you're looking at something bigger like a thesis, right? So when we have a large usable vocabulary, we're able to argue in a language, but when we are formalizing arguments and really zeroing in on what they mean, the definitions for those words have to be clear. And so we have a unit where we're going to talk about coming up with definitions so that we can really stipulate what the information is in a particular argument, and that will allow us to be more clear about what those claims mean so we can evaluate them. And so in the Calling Bullshit book, we are drawing on some of that language. One is the use of weasel words. An example of a weasel word that I was thinking about here is the word job creators. So if a weasel word is, or weasel wording is sort of exploiting the gap between the literal meaning and the implicature. So what is also being evoked by a word beyond its literal meaning. So what does job creator mean? We can look at what it does in policy and who's saying the word and when they're saying it, what they mean. But really, it is, if we narrow it really just to people who create jobs, that's one thing. But when we look at all the effects and the policies that are created for a particular kind of vague thing called a job creator, really what we're talking about is rich people. So making sure that rich people, but you would never say that, right? Like, I'm here for the rich people, I'm here for the rich class, I'm here for the top 1%. You would just call them job creators, and then you kind of can exploit that gap in meaning. So that's an example of weasel words and implicature. So, what do we need to become a better critical thinker? Well, it's not going to happen overnight. And like I said, this is one course where we present you with a certain set number of tools which you can practice, and you have opportunity to practice and apply them. And part of that is going to be learning concepts. So actually acquiring more language around critical thinking will help you be a better critical thinker, and also finding tools for clarifying our statements and getting really specific about them. So The other thing, I'll just move this here, that you need, I think, to develop over time is more knowledge and experience. So it really does take practice, and part of that is learning how to offer explanations, find additional information. So that is actually sometimes just research, but also about finding out about various kinds of bullshit. Knowledge of various forms of bullshit will help you spot it better. And so when we're spotting bullshit, we're spotting particular claims that are intended to distract, confuse, or mislead, right? And what's interesting about the book and what they argue in the book is that over and over again we find that when we put this kind of lower grade information out into the world, it takes more work to undo people's belief in it than it does in putting it out in the first place. So that kind of helps us think that, we need to be really careful about what we're putting out and how we explain it and what we think is justified, citing our sources, appealing to proper authorities, and so on. So when we start thinking about whether you are a critical thinker, what we're getting at is the question of what that means and what guides our thinking. So we are definitely thinking all of the time. We are definitely forming beliefs all of the time. The critical thinking piece is to look at those beliefs, to look at the reasoning, to look at the evidence, and to try to slow that down and look at not just the individual claims, but to develop a method of analyzing those claims so that they can get closer to the truth. So our beliefs, when we improve upon them, I guess the argument in chapter 1 is really saying that, the better our beliefs are, the better we are able to navigate our world. And we can't just sort of choose whatever we want to believe. Our beliefs are caused in us by the world, partially, and also that we are able to analyze them because we have this ability to reflect on the principles behind them. So if critical thinking is thinking disciplined by being guided by principles of good method, it means that we are able to discipline our thinking, shape and reform the ways that we form beliefs, not from scratch and not entirely, but we can make some really significant improvements. And I guess that's the idea, is are we motivated to improve? Are we going to try to take on some of these tools and see where they take you? And that's sort of our hope for Unit 1.